I was thinking, sometimes you find things in places you never would have thought to look for them. For example, I found this fire hydrant here in the middle of a woodland trail here in Kirkland. It's not very far from the interstate. It's a beautiful forest walk called Watershed Park. There used to be waterworks here in the park, and today this is, I guess, a remnant of that. I'm not really sure what the story is behind it. But sometimes you find things in places you weren't looking for them. It makes me think of the Narnia Chronicles, in which the Pevensey kids went through a wardrobe into a forest, which they certainly weren't expecting to find in the back of a wardrobe. And when they got in the forest, they found a shining lamp out in the middle of the woods, and it turned out to have a really interesting story behind it. When you find something in a place that you weren't looking for it, it's a good idea to question, what's the story behind this? Because often there's a real good story. In the Bible, there are many occasions where someone finds something they weren't looking for. One of the stories tells about Moses, who was tending his sheep out in the desert in Arabia, and he came upon a burning bush. And even though the bush was on fire, it wasn't being consumed. And he looked at it and he said, "What is this?" And he began to pay attention to it. And as he paid attention to that odd thing, God spoke to him and called out to him and said, "Go back to Egypt and liberate my people from slavery and bring them into the land that I will give them." You know, that's exactly what Moses needed. He was a murderer on the lam. He needed to redeem his life. And then out of nowhere, in a place he least expected it, God spoke to him and gave him a chance to redeem his life. Well, none of us expected to be in the middle of a global pandemic. Just a few weeks ago, we were in the middle of the greatest economy we had ever seen. And now all of a sudden, we're facing the worst financial crisis in the history of the United States. Everything seems to have fallen apart. And many are saying that the life we used to live will never be back. We certainly didn't expect to find this. But maybe it's a good idea to take a look at it and ask ourselves, what's the story behind it? The government's doing that right now. They're trying to figure out where the virus came from. But I can tell you this, God did not send it. The coronavirus is not the judgment of God on us. God didn't send it. But in the midst of it, God is at work. As a matter of fact, God is a specialist in taking things that were meant for evil and turning them to good. What is God telling you in the midst of this coronavirus? There's this wonderful passage in Isaiah 65, verse 1, where God says, "I revealed myself to a people who did not ask for me. I was found by a people that was not seeking me. And I say, here I am, here I am." Maybe God's calling out to you right now saying, in the midst of all this, here I am, here I am. The book of Hebrews says, today, if you hear God's voice, do not harden your hearts. And Romans chapter 10, verse 13 says this, "Whoever calls upon the name of the Lord will be saved." Maybe God is calling to you today. Maybe it's time to ask yourself, what is this strange thing that we have come into? What is God saying? If God's calling you, call back. Call out to him. Just say, "God, here I am, save me." And I promise you, he will.